we go from one imprisonment to demise to the next imprisonment and demise. This one has not yet, and hopefully it will not end in a McAfee or an Epstein. And if it does, it's going to be even more suspicious given the hell that Julian Assange has been put through over the last decade. But let's get to Julian Assange and some recent revelations about the reliability of the indictment that was used to attempt to extradite him and was used in court proceedings in the UK. For anybody who doesn't know, Julian Assange, where do we start? WikiLeaks founder dumped a bunch of credible information on a number of issues, including American intelligence in Iraq and exposing war crimes being performed. From my understanding, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't think I'm wrong, they never published one inaccurate or falsified document or email or piece of information. Julian Assange was indicted on, what was it? It was computer charges, basically having conspired with Chelsea Manning or asked Chelsea Manning to unlawfully obtain computer records, which were the records that Chelsea Manning had communicated to Julian Assange. And so he was indicted on this in the United States. Apparently, the Obama administration was looking into doing it, never really got very far. It went to the next level under the Trump administration. He was indicted. They made a request for extradition, which was denied by the UK court. But the UK court relied on this indictment, which was then had become a superseded indictment, which contained allegations to the effect that Julian Assange had not only conspired with Chelsea Manning to request for unlawful access to a computer to get these documents, but had done so previously in the past with another individual whose name I'm not even going to try to pronounce, an Icelandic guy. And the courts relied on that, those allegations in the indictment, which were that Julian Assange had done this before with other people. Therefore, it was more plausible that he had done it again with Chelsea Manning. Turns out that this witness is basically nothing shy of a repeat remorseless criminal of the worst kind, engaged in assault-type behavior with underage individuals, pathological, sociopathic criminal, thief, liar, forger, and now he sat down with an Icelandic news outlet to explain the fact that he had basically fabricated these allegations for immunity that was in fact given to him by, if I'm not mistaken, it's the Trump appointees in the Department of Justice. And now we're finding out that basically the indictment is probably totally falsified, if not materially falsified, to have gotten him indicted and requested for extradition in the first place. Did I miss anything? And take it from there.
Yeah, just one addendum to that is that he was working as a FBI informant while he was doing some of the illicit hacking activities. So it was one extensive, expansive entrapment effort against Assange at the behest and the behalf of the FBI, including hacking into hacking into U.S. databases. So that raises some very interesting questions. I mean, some of these people are connected to there's some other hacking cases that they're connected to that raises questions about what exactly happened in certain respects in 2016. A lot of other things. The FBI's complicity. This was Mueller who was behind this at the time. And Mueller has a long history of this kind of activity. And no shock that he's using another pedophile as a source. Mueller loved pedophiles as a source. Epstein was likely an informant for him. Go back and look at the Asimov case in San Francisco that was very peculiarly hushed up by Mueller. A lot of those files disappeared and were returned back to the person, which is shocking. We'll have Eliza Blue on in a couple of weeks for a sidebar, and she's one of the leading advocates against human trafficking in the United States, follows a lot of these cases. We'll talk about the Facebook case a little later in that regard too. This is, Mueller was one of the biggest people complicit in this kind of activity, and this guy ends up in the middle of it. And maybe most interesting, we'll relate later to our January 6 cases. There were some people out there running around saying it's not possible for the government to ever hide an informant as an unindicted co-conspirator. But if you read the second superseding indictment, this guy was referred to as a teenager. And then later on, he only has one other reference. If you understand where it is, it's as an unindicted co-conspirator. But I thought they never did that.
And just to clarify, Robert, for everyone, he was referred to as teenager as a defined term, even though he was 28. and by country of, I think that, what was it? Oh, by NATO instead of the country. It was not an attempt to conceal the identity, but it certainly would mislead people into thinking that this 28-year-old, who, while being the informant for the FBI, was being given immunity for crimes he was committing contemporaneously with being the informant. I do wonder when, if it doesn't already happen, when do these informants, when does the FBI become active participants and active, not entrappers even, but the active participants in the criminal activity that they are supposed to be stopping?
That's basically the upshot of his allegations, is that he did a lot of this stuff at their behest and behalf, that at their request. So that, these extraordinary, some of the allegations were just purely fabricated out of thin air. Other allegations were things that he was doing at their request, not at Julian Assange's request. So it is just one more evidence. I mean, all the other charges against Assange were deeply problematic under the First Amendment all along. Even the Obama administration ultimately conceded that. They called it the, quote, New York Times problem. And the only reason he ever got indicted is because of the many, many idiots Donald Trump put in power. And, this is a place where Trump deserves criticism, frankly. One of those people in this particular space was Rick Grinnell, who did do a lot of good work in certain spaces, but not in this space. He helped orchestrate. I mean, he was a guy who was begging to be on Mitt Romney's neocon team. He was rejected because he was gay. And then Grinnell was, and at times Grinnell did good work while he was at ODNI, but he did a lot of questionable work in this capacity. He helped orchestrate the arrest and extradition of Assange. The DOJ, under both Sessions and Bill Barr, orchestrated the indictment of him. Pompeo was one of the huge people pushing for it. And Mike Pence helped arrange it, including effectively, in my view, bribing the country of Ecuador. So, as we saw this week with people like Milley, Trump kept trusting the wrong people when choosing people, and he needs to show a capacity to improve in that respect. But it's one of my few criticisms of Trump, but it's a deserved one in my view.
And just to explain to everyone what the New York Times problem was, is that if they were going to indict Julian Assange, and if they were going to go after him for what he did, the main issue was they would, in theory, have to go after the New York Times for the same reasons, for having published the same information, the same documentation, the same stories. And so the question was, how do you go after one political adversary for having done the same thing as your political ally has done? And they went after it by basically really tailoring, for lack of a better word, that particular accusation, the charge against Julian Assange, as being one of instigating Chelsea Manning to commit a crime, to communicate the information to him. So that was how they could justify going after Assange while allowing, giving the New York Times a pass. But this is...
And the problem is they're criminalizing basically anybody in the press or any investigator who requests a whistleblower blow the whistle can now be put into prison for life. I mean, that's the effect of it, because that's what they're criminalizing. And that's why it's so deeply problematic. A lot of constitutional scholars have said this indictment violates core First Amendment freedoms and is the greatest threat to a free press and an investigative press, ordinary, everyday investigative folks in ever. Because, think about it. Everybody at some point that's in that space is going to request, hey, tell me what the story is. Like this good book by Seymour Hersh, The Killing of Osama bin Laden, a gift of a local subscriber, by the way, which many thanks to him for. Won't disclose his name or anything else like that because of maybe where he works. But Seymour Hersh has disclosed more scandals than anybody. They would love to put the Seymour Hershes of the world in prison, or threaten that, so that there are no more Seymour Hershes or Julian Assanges. And that's why this prosecution was always deeply offensive. What Julian Assange did was disclose government secrets. It reminds me of the movie Sneakers, Seacrest Industries, too many secrets. And that's how the corruption of the state survives. It survives off of secrets. That's what Julian Assange recognized. And that's what he did more to expose than any single human being in human history. And that's why they want to make an example of him by making his life as utterly miserable as possible based on these bogus charges. But classic prosecutors, they were in trouble with their extradition, so they fabricated an entire second superseding indictment against him. And it's deeply disturbing. But people will be, hopefully this will be further information in the court of public opinion that will motivate the British courts to affirm the denial of extradition and finally free Julian Assange.
Now, Aaron asked a good question here. Robert, what is the common thread in Trump's crappy appointments? Is there a common thread of
deferring to Bushites and the Federalist Society types? So it's what I mean. And by the way, many people told him he was making the wrong choice, but he didn't listen. And he hired a lot of. He used to say, "I hire the best people." Before he got to the White House, that was true. After he got there, he hired some of the worst people.
Well, I mean,
and there needs to be more criticism of it because, frankly, he hasn't heard enough of it.
Well, especially if he's going to run again in 2024 or earlier. Yep. So what I was going now, so the issue with Assange, where is he now? Because the extradition was denied, but he is still
they won't let him. They won't give him bail pending the appeal. So he's still in he's in severe isolation in one of the worst prisons in the world.
And this is shocking because we've talked about it before, but the judge denied extradition on the basis of health issues, the trauma that it would have on his being, and meanwhile is still keeping him locked up in perhaps one of the worst conditions possible in the UK. What does anyone make of that in terms of sense?
That they want him to Epstein himself, but that they don't have enough. But it's not working. They want him to go out the McAfee way. That's a reasonable interpretation. You describe something as torture, so much torture that you're not going to allow him to be extradited, but then you turn around and continue to torture him for years while the appeal pens. What other interpretation is there?
Someone says it was him listening to Jared Kushner. That
Kushner didn't recommend 90% of these people. Kushner was not the key problem. It was a source of long grievance, and some of us didn't complain enough, frankly, including myself during the time it was there. And, watching Bill Barr do his routine has been a reminder at how, more of us should have said more. There was, hey, don't worry, Trump knows what he's doing. Nope, in some of these cases, he had no clue what he was doing.
All right, and so, and that's it. What's the timeline on the Assange appeal? Because he's, other than the fact that he's been in there in some form of detention for over close to a decade now, what is the appeal process for the extradition proceedings in the UK?
I mean, they've just been sitting on it, the appeals court, as far as I know. But what I think it will do is it will put more pressure on the Biden Justice Department to whether they really want to pursue this, whether they want to go down in flames over this, potentially. And it'll put more pressure on the British courts. So this is where the court of public opinion constantly matters, and credit to that Icelandic journalist who just dug into part of the story and uncovered it.
I'm going to send the link. I'll tweet the link. We'll share it in the community tab and on Locals. I forgot to do it before. It's an amazing piece that you don't see here. I had to Google.
It was the article of the day at vivabarneslaw.locals.com.
Good. So Locals has gotten already. I'll just send it out on Twitter. I had to Google the law publication to make sure it wasn't illegitimate in the eyes of the mainstream. It's legitimate.
It's very serious.
Yeah. No, it's thorough. But you appreciate now that, at first, and for anyone who doesn't know the history, they tried to get Assange on allegations of sexual assault in Sweden. I forget the term now for removing or breaking a condom during the act. There's a word, stealthing, which is what he was accused of having done in Sweden. And that was the basis they were trying to extradite him from the UK to Sweden, where he, in theory, thought he was going to be extradited from Sweden to the United States. Eventually, they dropped those charges, and they alleged it was because of the period of time for which he was out of the country. They couldn't conduct an investigation. And then you have this indictment with the superseding indictment coming in, alleging him of having conspired with Chelsea Manning. And now you find out that basically the superseding indictment was based on admitted lies from a recognized potato file, compulsive criminal, there's no other way to describe it, who was given immunity for those allegations by the FBI, for whom he was acting as an informant while committing crimes on what can only be described as a crime spree. There's your faith in the system, people, and try not to get jaded as you learn that this is how it works the older you get. Okay.
Just one more illustration. And again, hidden as or the person identified. He was the only, for certain parts of the indictment, the only other unindicted co-conspirator, and he was acting as an informant during that time period, which Andrew McCarthy and a bunch of other people said couldn't possibly happen.